Deadly Grounds Coffee knows how important your coffee is to you. Every batch is roasted to perfection with a unique special method that brings out the richest, deepest, smoothest flavor you'll ever find. We're coffee freaks too, and deadly serious about our brew. Just one sip and you'll know why we say, once you go deadly, you don't go back. It's truly coffee to die for. So when you're ready to get a little deadly, get online and order yours at getdeadly.com. It's coffee so good, it's scary.
Greetings and welcome once again to another episode of the Retro Reductopus Cephala Podcast, the only show that celebrates all the things that made growing up awesome. We are part of the Dorkening Podcast Network, and as always, we are brought to you by Deadly Grounds Coffee, coffee to die for. I am your host. My name is Parasite Steve, aka Steve Van Samson, and although I am cohortless tonight, I have a just whopper, just a hell of a guest for you guys on this episode of the Brig. This week, down in that rusted out hull we call the Brig, we are honored to have a New York Times best-selling and Bram Stoker Award-winning author of such novels as Snowblind, Road of Bones, Ararat, The House of Last Resort, and his new one, The Nightbirds. He's prolific, he's generous, and he's probably taller than you think. Why, it's none other than Christopher Golden. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you, Parasite Steve. All I can say is I was lured down here with the promise of chocolate, and I'm not leaving until I get it.
Well, there is some in the drawer, but, you got to be careful. Look around first. Admittedly, there's a lot of sharp, rusty edges on a lot of surfaces, so watch your elbows. But, the flip side to that is you won't need to worry about any Icelandic witches.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, and if the chocolate's good enough, tetanus is a fine price to pay.
Fair enough. See, we love it when our guests are down to play, so that's great. I'm of course referring with the Icelandic witches comment to your new novel, The Nightbirds, but we will get to that in just a few minutes. Definitely excited. I've actually finished reading that. It was a really great time, and I'm excited to talk about it. But
thank you.
Before we do, your career, sir, is so impressive and expansive. It's just crazy, and you're such a humble guy. So I'm going to make you as uncomfortable as humanly possible by just constantly talking about how great this career that you've built is. Your first novel was Of Saints and Shadows, which was 1994.
Yeah.
Yep. It's a long time ago, man.
It was a long time ago. I actually started that book in I want to say the fall of 1988 when I was a senior in college.
Wow.
And I sold it in 92. And that was my first novel, period. There are 7 books in that series. Most people think there are only 3 or 5, but there are actually 7.
And that's That's the Shadows series, right? Or
the Peter Octavian series or the Shadow Saga, depending on where it's listed. Yeah.
Very cool. And so you start there. You're starting on, you're in college. You wrote your own book, and this is a vampire book. It's your take on vampires, and then you go on to have a career that has spanned so far over 3 decades. I assume there are more decades to come. So. We're not there.
Man. Listen, I can't afford to retire yet. If ever, this is the thing when you do this for a living, retirement seems to be a pipe dream. When I told my wife I would like to retire at some point, I'm 57, so she sort of laughed and she was like, "You don't want to retire," and I was like, "I kind of do," but for me, retirement would be like, just being able to write only what I want and only when I feel like it.
Yeah.
So that's the key. Is the one I feel like it is the key.
Not being under those crazy deadlines that you are clearly under at all times. I mean, I every time I've read an interview with you, you rattle off at the end all the things you have coming up. So you can do that for us at the end of this interview. But
Sure.
I'm prepared. I'm prepared for a lot of things.
Okay, do it, man. Do it.
We'll get there. So in 30 years, you have, this is according to Goodreads, and this number, I got to tell you, it doesn't make sense to me. Maybe you can help me with this number. Goodreads says you have an unfathomable 768 published works across every imaginable form of media.
I feel like that's, I mean, published works is a broad, phrase. But I still think that's probably not correct. That's got to be including like, trade paperback collections of comics and who knows what else. I mean, but I've written, and also like I wrote articles for magazines. I did a lot of
right, sure.
journalism when I was very young and all of that. So who knows where AI, also you can't trust AI, period. I mean, it's just, it will tell you, or it will give you a recipe for something that includes hemlock. You just can't. But have I written a lot? Yeah, I've written a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, we're talking, you said articles, comics, novels, short story collections. I'm sure you've done novellas. You've also done audio dramas, which we're going to get into later, and you've done screenplays. I know you did, some work on the 2019 Hellboy movie, the David Harbour, and despite being uncredited. Do you have bad feelings about that? I've never asked you this. I've always wondered
about the credit.
Yeah, about that whole process.
Well, the thing is that you learn a lot. If you're going to be a professional in this business, you have to learn how each part of the business works.
Mm-hmm.
So, in order to be credited on a film, you need to have been responsible for a certain percentage of the filmed version. So you might have done 75 different drafts of something, but if only 5 pages of what you worked on ends up in the film, you're not going to get a screen credit. That's how the rules are, which is fine. I'm credited on the most recent one, on The Crooked Man.
Oh, you are? Okay, so my mistake on that. So both you worked on.
Yes, I worked on both. So I have a credit on The Crooked Man. That's by me and Mike Mignola and the guy who directed the movie, Brian Taylor. As far as the Harbor movie is concerned, and I've talked about this a lot recently, I feel like it's really unfortunate because, and I don't know the answer to this, but whoever did the final edit and final cut of that film, I think did the movie a massive disservice, because if you read the final script, the shooting script, it's actually really good. So kudos to everybody who worked on it. Andy Cosby did more drafts than anybody, but Aaron Collette did a bunch of drafts. I did a couple early on. And I just feel like I wish people could just read that script, because that's the shooting script is way better than the movie.
Right, and this is why we need more Ryan Cooglers out there who are able to hold on to that original vision. Even if you aren't the writer yourself, like he is, I think we need more of that. People who are able to stand up for themselves and win and be like, no, you hired me. This is what I want to do. This is the idea. Right. I think the bones of that movie are fantastic, and I honestly, as much as I have loved every Hellboy actor, David Harbour, I think, is, to me, my favorite choice. I'm a big fan of his, and trust me, I love me some Perlman, but I don't know, I quite lament that he was in a Hellboy movie that nobody really cared about. But we don't have to talk about that more. I was just wondering, like, if there were bad feelings there. I'm glad they're not, because, you know, it makes sense, right? What you're saying. You've been in this business a long time. You know, you can't have hurt feelings over every little thing, because you're not going to make it. You got to
Well,
have
I mean,
thick
you can't
skin.
have hurt feelings over the rules, like over what you know the rules are.
Right,
That's
right.
that's fine. I mean, um, you know, on the other hand, there have been times over the course of my career, including very recently, that, you know, I've been absolutely screwed by people in business.
Mm.
Um, and I don't have hurt feelings over that. I have angry feelings,
Yeah,
you know, but that's different because those
yeah,
are people who aren't following the rules, you know.
yeah.
So,
And you can swear on this show. You know those fuckers.
oh, good. I'm glad. I wasn't sure. I believe at this point, Steve, that you know that I'm you know, I'm no stranger to profanity.
That's true. That's true. We're still waiting on the first drop, though, so we'll see. We'll see when that happens. So, you know, we're talking about Hellboy and everything, and you started off in 1988, and you wrote this novel that turned into a 7-book series. It's your own character, your own world. This is Peter Octavian, and then, you know, you go on to be you work on these characters. I mean, these aren't just like, you know, small characters that happen to exist. These are like larger than life beloved characters. I mean, you wrote the first ever Daredevil novel. You've written Alien books. You've written the X-Men. You've
Well, we can
Hellboy,
talk about that. I
obviously.
don't. I get. I'm very proud of my history doing media fiction, particularly because of some of the groundbreaking stuff I was able to do, which is a lot of it is right place, right time stuff, and also right pop culture reference. You know,
Mm.
um, and I won't go through how all of these things came about. But even at a time when a lot of my contemporaries in horror were sort of shitting on the idea of doing media tie-ins, and I was even told, "Oh, you're going to wreck your career. You shouldn't do this, etc., etc." I was like, "Look, I got into this because I love all of this stuff,
Mm.
and so if I had an opportunity to play with these characters that I loved, I was not going to turn it down. And not to
Hell yeah.
mention that I was a full-time writer at that point, and I needed to earn income.
Right.
So when I got offered something that just wasn't for me, I did turn it down. But the thing, or I tried to divert it to another writer that I knew who would be better for it, or who needed the money more than I did. But
Hmm.
um, but so many of them were yeah. So I wrote the very first original Daredevil novel. I wrote the very first original X-Men novels. I wrote the one and only Sons of Anarchy novel, the one and only Uncharted novel based on that game. I wrote
So cool.
Nancy Holder and I co-wrote the very first original Buffy the Vampire Slayer novel, the
Yeah.
first Buffy nonfiction book, first Buffy hardcover, first serial novel with that, you know, like, so you just go through all of these different things, and I loved being there first on all of these things
Hmm.
because you get to kind of set the bar, you know. Yeah, so it was great.
That's so cool. I mean, so there's some of these that we're mentioning here, you know, Buffy for sure, Hellboy for sure, that now, you know, fast forward all these years, you haven't just worked on these characters, you're kind of become very synonymous with these characters for a lot of people. Because you
Yeah.
didn't just write, you know, you wrote the first Daredevil, but you wrote how many Buffy novels did you write? A lot.
Yes. So that's the thing. Buffy and Hellboy are the two sort of like real prime ones. Although weirdly, like the X-Men Mutant Empire trilogy, every time I go to a convention, somebody brings the whole trilogy up to me, and
Oh wow.
like I read this every year and all this stuff, which I love because I've really put my heart into that thing. But and with Hellboy, yes, I forgot to even say the very first Hellboy novel, edited the first Hellboy anthology. But taking Hellboy alone, I think I've written 3 Hellboy novels, edited 4 anthologies, written tons of comic books in the world. Tom Stogowski and I co-wrote the very first Hellboy BPRD miniseries, the first
Hmm.
spin-off from Hellboy.
Hmm.
Um, and these audio dramas, and you know, I've just and have been involved in the Hellboy films. But that's because A, of my love for the character and the world, and B, because Mignola and I became good friends early on, and we do share a certain frame of reference so like I understand where he's coming from, and I understand, I think, the balance of his goals,
Mm-hmm.
and I've learned a lot from him, as far as like how to unclench and let the beauty of the weirdness happen.
Yeah.
And then with Buffy, same. I mean, it was so important to my career in the sense that it led me to so many opportunities that would not have happened otherwise. I mean, so many things would not have happened for me otherwise.
Mm.
But in that case, I think I did 13 Buffy the Vampire Slayer novels.
Wow.
And 3 or 4 tie-in books. I mean, nonfiction tie-in books. I did the 2 video games with Snagosky.
You guys did the 2 games, the Chaos
Yeah,
Bleeds, and
yeah. We wrote the 2
I
Buffy video games.
Chris, I played the absolute hell out of those games.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
loved
The
those.
first one was better.
The first one was a better game. They both had good stories.
Yeah.
You brought a lot of fun characters into the second one that weren't in the first one. You had Faith and you had Ethan Rain and different stuff.
And
But
Sid the Dummy.
Sid the Dummy, right? Who from a 1 episode appearance in season 1 or something.
Had
2.
to do it. It was just too much fun to be able to sit in there. But yeah, so we did those, and I wrote a ton of Buffy and Angel comics, and of course, 2 years ago, Amber Benson and I co-wrote and co-directed Slayer's A Buffyverse Story, which was a podcast series on Audible,
which I devoured. And I just, I've talked to you about this before, but Buffy is one of my big fandoms from the 90s, and that audio drama, man, it meant a lot to me. It really was, and a lot of other fans, and I turned a lot of people who maybe didn't know it was coming out onto it, and they were so excited to see all of these actors returning and stuff. And I think that the thing that if I could just, I don't know if this was you and Amber, seems like it was a pretty cohesive thought the whole time, but correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like justice for Cordelia was like a really big thing that you guys were concerned with.
Yes. Well, look, we wanted justice for Cordelia as a character, but we also wanted what we had hoped would be a healing experience for a lot of people who'd had whose experience on the series had been tainted by bad behavior.
Right, and that was all coming out about that time, and
yeah, so we wanted something that would leave a happy memory that would hopefully put some of those memories aside.
That's so amazing. And you guys had like some serious gets for that too, like some small roles. The kid who played Jonathan, who's not
Strong.
a kid. Danny Strong, yes. I couldn't believe you guys worked him in. And it was just
Danny, really... and that's the crazy thing is, like, Danny is one of the preeminent writers and producers in television and on film and on Broadway now. He's written for Broadway now.
Wow.
But he's a great guy, and he remembers where he came from, and he likes to play, and so and he was hysterically funny. Like 90% of what he does in that is improv. So
yeah, oh geez, that's awesome. Yeah, and everybody was just such a joy to hear again, slip back into their characters, and especially I think the star of the show for me personally was Juliet. I think Juliet Landau was absolutely blew me away. She like not one day has passed since 1997 or whatever the last time is she played Drusilla. Like I just couldn't even, I literally couldn't get over her.
Yeah, no, she's incredible in the room, especially, and she's also she knows her character and the world around her character so well that she was giving me notes. And I was incorporating them into the script, like while we're in the room and changing stuff.
Amazing.
She's like, oh yeah, but this happened, and she would do X, and I'd be, oh shit, yeah, you're right about that, Juliet. And so that was great. That was great.
Amazing stuff. I literally would love to do an entire podcast with you just on Buffy. We're not here for that, but maybe someday in the future we can come back. But so let's leave that there and dive into the Nightbirds. So this is your brand new novel, and you've been putting out about a novel a year for a number of years now, right? So last year was
it's been probably I think starting with Snowblind.
Okay, yeah.
2014. I feel like it's been one a year.
Oh wow! Since then, my God, how do you do it, man? You're crazy. You're crazy.
Well, I've slowed down, Steve. It used to be more than that.
Well, it's good
I don't know.
stuff.
I just, for me, it's, I feel incredibly fortunate in so many ways, but I feel incredibly fortunate that the ideas still come.
Yeah.
Because they don't come as often as they used to, and I'm not old yet, but I'm 57, but I'm definitely not young. And
I'm 37. I'm not old.
Yeah. But when I was younger, the ideas came fast and furious, and then it would just be like, go pick the one that you want to do.
Yeah.
And it might be because I now sort of am pickier. I dismiss things more that come into my head. I'm like, no, that's stupid, or that won't work, or it's not what I need right now.
Yeah.
But then occasionally I'll get oh yeah, I just had an idea for my not the book I'm finishing now, but the next one, and I'm super excited about that.
I saw you post about that. You said your 2027 novel. You had an epiphany in Bangor, I think.
Yeah, on the way home, driving home, I don't know. It just was like my mind wandered a little bit, and poof, there it was. And that's not usually how it happens.
The magic of Bangor.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it rubbed off on me, I guess. But yeah, so it's just but the Nightbirds is interesting because it's an example of a different kind of way that things happen for me as a creator, which is a lot of times I'll have bits and pieces of ideas, or I'll have an idea that doesn't feel whole or finished or worth writing a novel about.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll come across something else, or I'll even something that's already in my files, and I'll be like, oh, you know what? If I Reese's peanut butter cup this thing, it would be great. It'd be delicious, and that's what happened with the Nightbirds. I had the idea of the story of these two women on the run from a coven of witches with a baby. And my initial idea for it was very different from the way it's executed in the Nightbirds. But it wasn't a whole story to me. And then I'd read, I'd come across, I love abandoned places. I'm always fascinated by places that people have just sort of surrendered to time,
Nature reclaims this the ship.
Yeah. And so I ran across an article about a ship just like the one in the Nightbirds in Australia. Off the coast. It's a 19th century freighter that's like sunk up to its neck basically, and rusting, and it's been there for 100 years, and a mangrove forest had grown up from the inside of the ship. I was like, oh my God, that is so cool.
That's so cool. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, witches, this would be an interesting it would be an interesting overlap, an interesting melding of the right atmosphere for the right dread, if that makes sense.
It does. And, it's a bit of juxtaposition as well, because this is not an environment that we would typically picture witches being in. So that alone makes it unique and makes it interesting and, memorable. And I think, that is one of my favorite things, to take something outside of where you always see it. I love my, universal Gothic horror, and I love my Hammer Gothic horror, but man, it is really cool to see something like 30 Days of Night or Sinners that puts vampires in some place that, you know, we've never seen them. And that's certainly what you did here with your witches. So if I were to encapsulate how I feel about this book, I think that this is a book about failed relationships, about becoming a parent for the first time, and how things don't always go as planned. And it's also about, you know, just being an imperfect partner, and how that how being an imperfect partner doesn't mean you're necessarily a terrible one, but you know, everything we do affects our partners in very deep ways that, you know, we don't always understand at first. And so to me, this was like, there was a lot of relationship stuff in this
Yeah.
book. There was a lot of parenthood stuff in this. And there's, you know, obviously redemption of a sort for the main character, for Charlie, even though he doesn't like being called Charlie.
Hmm.
But so the New York Times calls this book, you got some incredible blurbs for this. New York Times calls this a tense, chaotic horror novel that moves like a thriller. Golden combines these elements with emotionally complex background stories and rich lore. This novel juggles a lot, but Golden directs it all with the confidence and flair of a seasoned orchestra conductor to deliver another outstanding read. Pretty fine words there from the New York Times, I would say.
Yeah,
Not so
listen,
bad.
I mean, it was wonderful to get that, and the reviewer there is Camino Iglesias, who's an extraordinary writer.
Oh, I didn't even realize that was
Yes,
Gavino. That's so cool.
and it is, you know, it's amazing to get. You know, the thing is, Steve, honestly, like I was talking to my wife and my daughter about this yesterday. Something else happened yesterday that I can't announce yet, which is that there's a um, uh, something I wrote has been nominated for an award that hasn't been announced yet,
Very cool.
but that means the world.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That means the world to me. And coming from my background as a writer, and coming through, you know, the various kinds of works that I've done over the years, um, there's the fight to get respect, but there's also the fight to view yourself as worthy of it, or
Mm,
your work, not yourself, I should say, of your work as worthy of it. And it's a constant struggle, right? It's a constant struggle. And so when something like that happens, on the one hand, I'm like, wow, that's great. On the other hand, I'm like, oh, like, you know, I I'm uncomfortable with, like, Nightbird's got 3 stars, got a star at Publishers Weekly,
yeah.
Library Journal, and Book List. Amazing, like amazing.
Yeah.
Um, it's only happened, I think, once before in my career, for Road of Bones, and it's incredible to get that kind of support, but it also makes me really uneasy. Like, in some way, it's like, oh, is it is it worth it? I don't know. You're just like
It's
that constant
amazing.
doubt. Um,
That's amazing, you know, and I think that anybody listening to the show tonight who, you know, is a writer or an aspiring writer, you know, who looks up to you, they would be shocked to learn that Christopher Golden suffers from imposter syndrome too. Like after all these years, you know, 3+ decades.
oh,
Um,
constantly, constantly. But the thing is, the way I always look at it when I talk to people about imposter syndrome, I'm just say, look, you let other people judge the quality of the work. You know, do the work the best you can. Try to get the work because you're a working writer. Um, you know, deliver what you promise, and, you know, let other people worry about how they rate the quality of it.
right.
Don't get carried away with good reviews. You know, I had one. I think I've said a million times. I had one review that said Golden is one of the master fantasists of his generation. And within like 2 months of that, I had another review that said this book sucks donkeys. Um, and so the thing is that if you take that first review too seriously, then you have to
Yeah.
also take that second review seriously. Um, so you've got to find some kind of happy medium and just get the work done and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
occasionally there is something that makes you think, oh, maybe I learned something over the years. Maybe I've, actually gotten to be good at this. And so the reception the Nightbirds is getting makes me so happy, because it's just instinct at this point. It's like,
Yeah.
what do you feel about it? And so, yeah, it is a book about relationships. It is a book about how nobody is perfect and we all make mistakes. And it's a very book about supernatural evil, but it's about really ordinary humanity,
Yeah.
and how we all need a little space we need a little space and a little grace.
Fair enough. I think
But
that's a
yeah,
really good
man,
way to put it.
and also back to something completely different. The witches in this thing aren't witches like anybody else's witches, because I always like to say, like, why do we have stories about witches? Why do we have stories about vampires? Like, when we're talking about some kind of supernatural trope or evil, legendary evil, I like to sort of invent some history before the history, some mythology
Right.
before the mythology.
Right.
And
This is what inspired the things we're afraid
right,
of.
right. And to me, that's always really fun and interesting. So I'm entertaining myself, but if it works for other people, that makes it better.
That's I think the way that, I mean, it's great to hear you say that still after all these years. You're entertaining yourself. That's certainly how I have approached things too. It's like I gotta be having fun, or else it's pointless. But so these witches that inspired the witches, you call them the Night Weavers, and I think this is very, very interesting. And I thought it would be kind of fun. So we have a very close friend of the show of Retro Redoctopus who's in our group all the time, and we've just become really good friends with him over the years. And he's actually Icelandic, and he lives in Iceland. He's never left, and his name is Birker, and he goes by Leikjaren as his handle online, and he's been on the show lots of times. And so I was like, he was just talking to me a few weeks ago, right before I started the book, about how he wished that there were more things that used Icelandic myths. And he's like, oh, there's so many great ones. And he's like, oh, I wish we could see more Icelandic stuff in pop culture, because he likes all the same stuff that we do.
Right.
It
Yeah.
makes its way over there. And so I was telling him about this book. I was listening to it, and you have this word, the Nautavivier, which is the night weavers, literally, I assume in Icelandic that you have. And so immediately I look up online. I'm like, oh my God, is this a real mythology? And I found another interview where you were talking about it, and you said this was something that you were inspired by the actual myths, and then you kind of went your own way and created your own thing. So I have a couple questions from our buddy Berker, who
Okay.
who I thought it'd be fun. We could just pose them. He says, let me see. He was very interested in this book. He's definitely going to read it. He's very excited about it. He wonders what inspired you to go with Icelandic mythology in the first place. Why did you go to that corner of the world? And why did you choose in the end to make up your own witches?
So let's see.
So he's got his hands on his hips with this
Yes.
one, I think. He's
Why
like,
Iceland to begin with? So I would say, first of all, I've always wanted to go, and I never have. I've watched a number of television shows and films set in Iceland over the last 10 years. But I also felt like I've been doing this a long time, and most of the places that I might hit up for this kind of mythology creation, I've done before, and other people have done before. And so it was actually the very fact that Iceland is largely untapped, and because I hadn't done anything set there, that I was like, okay, Iceland is a good place to go for this kind of thing. But also, and interestingly, I haven't made this connection prior to this, but I've been talking about why Galveston.
oh yeah.
And Galveston is a place, because of its history, because of the history of the storms, the hurricanes that have done so much damage there and destroyed things over the years, because of the historical figures like Jack Johnson, like, and various people that have been there over the years. It has a certain aura about it that makes it feel like sort of things are possible in Galveston. Like, it's more believable for something crazy like this, something weird or supernatural to happen in a place that has this aura of potential mysticism than in Dallas or Houston, right?
Fair enough.
And in many ways, that's why Iceland, because we've plumbed the depths of the United Kingdom and Ireland and Germany and a lot of other European countries so often that it felt like the possibilities were more fertile. In if I set this in Iceland, the level of disbelief, what the reader needs to do to suspend disbelief is, I think, less strenuous if I say it's Icelandic, because it's less familiar to them. They don't have as many things to say, oh, this reminds me of this, or this reminds me of that.
Good point. Yeah.
So I did begin to do some research into Icelandic myth, and I don't even remember what bits that I may or may not have taken, but I do remember that I just said, oh, screw it, I'm just gonna do my own.
Yeah.
The other part of that is that the Urwitch, the idea of the Urwitch, is something I invented for the Outerverse comics that I do with Mike Mignola.
Sure.
For
Yeah.
Baltimore and Lady Baltimore and all of that stuff.
Yeah. Nice.
And so while this doesn't take place in the same world as those comics, it shares some DNA.
It could.
And so I basically just broadened and deepened and borrowed from myself in that regard too. And yeah, it was about making it feel more possible. So hopefully he doesn't find that offensive, but
he'll get over it. He did mention a couple great myths, and I will certainly say them right now. If I can pronounce them remotely correctly, it'll be a miracle. But he urges, I think he would say, come on back another time and see what else Icelandic mythology has to offer. He says the Huldufolk are the hidden people, or the elves, what we think of what became, basically what Tolkien took elves from, the hidden people. And he said the women of the mist were very scary, very dark. And he said, this is just there's a lot of stuff that really gets in his mind very, very dark and stuff like that. So I just wanted to give our buddy a shout out as well.
Okay, sounds good.
Maybe you'll write a story about the hidden people, and one man in Iceland will be the happiest man in the entire universe.
Exactly.
That'd be great. But this is a great book, guys. It's out now, The Night Birds. The last thing I had to mention this, Chris, there's no reason for you to know this. I'm a huge nature nerd, and I love birds so much. It's like one of my dorky things. And anybody who hears the term that you use a lot in the book, the title is Night Birds, but a lot of times you say night hawks. So I think a lot of people might, not be bird nerds, and they might be like, oh, it's a hawk. And in fact, a night hawk is not a night hawk at all. It's related to the whippoorwill. I think the whippoorwill is probably the one people will know. I know you mentioned one time, because I was paying attention. You did mention the Chuck's Will's widow, which was pretty cool. I was happy about that. But these are birds that I have always been really creeped out by. So they're weird, man. Like, they're small. They have like evil eyes. They like rest on the ground. You can come upon one by accident, like on a path through the forest, and they come out at night, and they have these giant mouths. So the group of birds, they're the nightjars is the group, and that means that they have these giant frog mouths, and a lot of times when their mouth is closed, it looks like a little teeny little nubbin of a beak, just a little hook. And then they open their mouth and it's like, oh my God, you can fit a softball in that thing. Like, holy crap. So I just had to say that like the fact that you wrote a story where there were evil night jars blew my mind. I'm like, this is the craziest thing because I've always been creeped out by these things. And for those who read this book or have already read this book and assumed that a nighthawk is a hawk or a bird of prey, check out what they really look like. Do a little Google image search.
Honestly, before I started, like when I was writing the book, and I was like, I was doing my bird research.
Yeah.
Initially, I was like, no, nighthawk, it's a hawk. And so I was looking at it. I found that no, it's not a hawk at all. The nighthawks are something completely different. And that made me really happy because it just, I don't know, it lends a certain verisimilitude to the proceedings, I guess.
And it's also unplumbed,
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not as plumbed as something like a hawk or an eagle or a crow or a vulture or something that's, a harbinger. I think that's why King's The Dark Half, he made sparrows scary. Who would have thought that was possible? To this day, I imagine the sounds of the sparrow bones being crushed under boot, like that has never left me. But the, something that's different is what we're looking for. And I think that, it's really cool that you happen to. It's funny that you didn't go in with that thought that this is a creepy ass bird.
Yeah. No, I literally went into, doing research about, birds that are indigenous to this area and birds who are nocturnal.
Yeah.
In this area. And so that's why you found, nighthawks and why you found owls in there, obviously, and other things. So it was really fun though.
Yeah. That's cool, man. I'm glad you had fun with the bird shit. The bird shit is that's my shit. I love it. So let's just move on. I want to, you were mentioning your awards and how it's not always the easiest thing to accept that you deserve them. But you and Mr. Tom Snigoski recently won a really cool award for Hellboy and the BPRD, The Goddess of Manhattan. This was a audio book, but it was written by you guys specifically for audio. So it was a dramatized adaptation, and it won Best Original Work at the 2025 Audio Awards, which was, I think, last month or the month before. It was recently.
Yeah, I remember. And the actual awards are super cool. They're made of stone. They're sort of ordinary looking. They're triangular shaped, but they're made of stone and engraved, and they're really cool.
Very, very cool.
Yeah, the thing is that we're up against. I had previously, Tom wrote this third one with me for time concerns. He came in with me on this one, which was great. I had previously been nominated for, I think, the first of the three for the Audie as well, but didn't win.
Is that the Wasps? The Plague of Wasps.
Plague of Wasps, yeah. And so when we were nominated for this, I was like, oh, that's nice, but this is too weird for these very normal people to vote for it to win.
Right.
So I was thrilled. But it's also, yes, I'm very proud of the work that we did. I think it's a really fun story, but it's really down to Scott McCormick at Graphic Audio, who is not only the director, but he's also he's the voice of Hellboy. He's the director of it. He casts the rest of the cast, so I'm thrilled that we won it, but Scott deserves at least as much credit.
Yeah, it's quite a presentation. If anybody's interested, definitely check this out. There's cinematic music, there's sound effects. It's a radio play. It's a radio play in the way that the old style, the Shadow knows, Hellboy's cool.
Yeah, it's a full cast audio drama, and there are three of them. The second one is Lobster Johnson, and that one was just so much fun. I actually think that one is the most fun of the three of them for me.
Yeah.
Very Yeah.
It's a great line of, it's a great product. It's a great listen. They're like around 5 hours each, so they're not like crazy long. It's just this perfect bite-sized thing you can listen to for a few days and hopefully re-listen later. Very, very fun, especially for fans of Hellboy who just can't get enough. I mean, it's another media. It's another way to experience these characters that you love so much. So I guess what I want to ask is, about the people you've gotten to collaborate with over the years. We've talked about this so far already a little bit, and there's just a long list of incredible people that you've gotten to work with. Obviously we mentioned Tom Snagosky, and Mike Mignola is a huge one, obviously, and you mentioned the Outerverse. You already said it, but Baltimore. Lady Baltimore, Joe Golem. Joe Golem, I read the Drowning City like years ago. That's the original book. That was such a fun read. And I think what got me there, what I did know you at the time, but I didn't realize that you had written it. What got me there was Mignola, and I had come across it online. And then I get it. I ordered it online, and I get it, and I'm like, oh my God, Chris wrote this. Like, this is the craziest thing. So that's actually the first thing you ever signed for me years ago.
Oh, cool.
Was that hardcover. But and obviously as well, Amber Benson,
Yep.
from Buffy, who played Tara on Buffy. She is clearly a good friend of yours, and you've gotten to work with her a lot over the years on various things. So I guess, I'll say this. I know this is a loaded question, and you don't want to say the wrong thing because, you never know who's listening, but do you have a favorite collaborator that you like to work with a lot?
I mean, all I can say is it's not Tom.
You asshole. I knew that was coming.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. There he is.
Tom Snagosky, ladies and gentlemen, friend of the show.
Here's what I will say. When Tom doesn't like to work with me anymore because he's got Janine now and she's way more attractive. But when Tom and I work together, I think we have more fun than at any other time.
Definitely.
Yeah. So he doesn't know what's good, but
I know what's good. It's so the other I think it was like yesterday, Janine was asking about like processes and how because there's a lot of goofing off when you're a writer in terms of, like,
of course.
the way the directions you go and stuff like that. And I was like, you should have just seen how Chris and I worked. I said the whole day was goofing off, and there was some work. We put our heads together and work, but so much of the process was almost like spitballing, like constant.
That's how you get the good stuff.
That, honest to God, and she can't understand that. She's coming from this academic side, and I'm like, you stuck-up thing. You gotta be crazy. You just gotta relax and just
have a shot.
Be mental,
No, but that's so true because so many of the things that I've collaborated on with so many different people, Tom included, have come about because of a conversation that was not serious.
Right.
You're just bullshitting about something and you say something and then you're like, oh, that would be really fun. We should do, XYZ.
Yep.
And that's the Frankenstein New World that we're doing right now. We're working on starting the 3rd volume of that, and it's like
amazing.
Happened because we were on the phone, and whatever led to it, there always is a moment of, what we should do. And that's
it'd be funny. Let's do that. And like that goes back to what you were saying earlier. You're just making yourself laugh. You're just having fun.
Yeah.
Well, especially, and again, it's funny because we're also, I think Tom and I, when we work together, work differently from. I think every collaborative relationship I've had is different from the others. When Tom and I work together, it's so often like about time, who has time to do what at what time. And so you go do this, and also you just can't be precious too much, because like, you know, he knows that I'm going to change a bunch of stuff, and I know that he's going to think certain things aren't this needs to be lighter, this is not silly enough, or whatever, or he has an idea for some villain that needs to be in the background, or, you know. So I don't know. It's very different from writing solo, Tom, but it's also oftentimes more fun.
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt.
It's more work.
It in the long run, it probably does end up being more work, but I think the work has more soul. There's like it's richer.
Yeah.
For the collaboration.
I mean, as long as you're not working with Janine, though.
Janine.
You know,
I don't even get me started.
Where's she today? She on vacation again?
No. We were actually working, and she was like, "All right, go do your little thing.
Go punk Golden. It's fine.
Go play with your little friends."
So, have you guys ever worked on anything that wasn't a licensed property? Have you ever done anything wholly original, the two of you?
Oh yeah.
So, So Frankenstein New World seems like that counts.
Well, that's a part of the Mignolaverse.
That's part of Mignola's, yes.
We've done, hold on, my son is calling. I mean, let's see, we did a 4-book series called Outcast, a middle grade fantasy series novels. We did the comic book miniseries Talent for Boom Studios at the very beginning of their life, which has been in development
forever.
Film or television literally since then for various companies over time, and is now in development yet again.
Jeez.
Let's see. We wrote a YA thriller. What's that?
The Menagerie.
We wrote a 4-book series that should have been a 5-book series called The Menagerie, which comic book readers would love. It's a sort of horror fantasy, horror fantasy X-Men kind of thing, horror fantasy League of Extraordinary Gentlemen kind of thing, but in prose form. Jesus, Tom, we wrote a one-off YA thriller novel called Force Majeure.
Oh yeah! Oh my God! Yeah,
that one was fancy. It had the Latin name.
Yeah, that was the one that had the Backstreet Boy on the cover.
Yeah,
the worst cover in the history of books.
Yes.
Which one was it? Which boy?
It wasn't a real Backstreet Boy. It just happened to.
No, he just looked like You know what he looked like? He looked like if Dawson from Dawson's Creek hadn't been hit in the face with a shovel.
Wow.
Yeah,
that is meaner than I typically have seen you get. Poor James Vanderbeek. Jeez.
I know.
I bring out the worst in him.
He does. He does bring out the worst in me. But you know what, Steve? If you had spent the time that I've spent with Tom, he would bring out the worst in you too.
Yeah,
You've been in the meetings with Tom that I've been in.
But before we move on, I know we're kind of getting close to our time today. Did you, Tom? You alluded to some crazy stories. I don't know. It's some crazy shit that has gone down.
There's some crazy Hollywood stories that Chris loves to tell, that I will meet a complete stranger who'll say, "You're that Tom?" And I'll be like, "Why? What's the matter?" And he said, "Well, there was a story." And I'm like, "Oh no, where did this? Who are you talking to?" Well, Chris said. I'm like, "Oh, it's all lies."
It's all true though. That's the problem.
Yeah.
No, listen, just in general, the most fun Tom and I have ever had together was always in Los Angeles, because it would be when I would be driving, and this was before GPS, really, before like we didn't have our phones. Tom can't find his way to the toilet. Never mind
read a map.
Right? He literally gets lost going down the block. So, and he's not going to drive in the kind of traffic that's in LA. He would get completely discombobulated then. So I'm driving, and he's got the map, and he's like, "What am I looking at?" So there are a lot of stories. I won't tell the worst one, but I will tell the one that made me want to kill him the most.
Oh, please. Let's hear that one.
Which is talent was being developed at the time at Universal, and we were in a meeting with the head of Universal and the producer who was on the project, who was a big deal, and our manager and Tom and me. And they kept struggling with the idea that it was a supernatural story. They wanted to explain it scientifically. And the producer came up with this thing, and he starts talking about midichlorians and Star Wars and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And the scientific explanation. And Tom looks at him like this, dead serious, and goes, "That's just dumb." And I'm like, what are you doing? These guys want to give us $1 million to make this thing into a movie. You don't tell him to his face that his idea is dumb. And I just couldn't believe it. So I'm trying to cover. So we leave the meeting and we get into the elevator, and our manager bursts out laughing. He's laughing so hard, tears are running down his face. And I look at Tom, I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And the manager is crying because he thinks it's so funny. And I'm just like, anyway.
No, you yelled at Pete's our manager, and he yelled at Pete, "You're just encouraging him."
Yes, you're just encouraging him. But yes.
That is hilarious. So did you guys lose the deal because of Tom? Well, what happened?
It still hasn't been made, hasn't Steve?
Okay.
It hasn't been made yet.
But that
right, I know, but like, you know,
it's not
that deal. Okay, so it's not.
All I'm going to say is it didn't help.
I thought it helped. I wanted to steer him in the right direction.
Yeah.
You know, in Tom's defense on that, if somebody had, in the making of that Jonah Hex movie, if somebody had stood up and said, you know, this is a Western, you don't need to give him superpowers, that's dumb, maybe we would have ended up with a pretty good Jonah Hex movie.
I mean, maybe.
That's what that makes me think of. They're like, oh, this is, we gotta turn this fantasy, this supernatural into science.
Though the original Jonah Hex stories, there was a hint of the supernatural in those stories.
You know what's funny? The Joe Lansdale run that he did in the 80s, he did like late 80s. There's a great collected, I think it's called Shadows West for Jonah Hex. This is a total sidebar. But he actually has an intro where he talks about that. And he said that he was convinced his whole life growing up, like he read those books when he was a kid, like the ones that came out in the 70s. And he's like, I always remembered them being like Weird West stories. And he was like convinced of it. And then he got the job and DC was like, hey, do you want to write a book? Who would you like to write? And he's like, oh, Jonah Hex, 100%. And so he's like, all right, well, I went back to read all these old issues and I kept expecting that all this supernatural stuff was going to happen, and it kept not happening. And he's like, I guess I made all that up.
Just
great.
The majority of it happened in like maybe the first 4 stories.
Okay.
And they were in Weird Western tales.
Yeah.
So it was a supernatural Western comic that it was in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I wonder. So there were probably other stories in each issue that were supernatural.
Yeah, there was like a character
that meld together in your head.
Yeah, there was a character called El Diablo that was kind of like a Zorro character.
Yeah, the Zorro guy. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That is super awesome, and neither here nor there. But Snogoski, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
I got work. Janine's calling.
You're supposed to go into the ghost, like woo.
I know. I wish I could do like a special effect, or
we'll add that in post. Get out of here, you bum.
Do your own.
Go do some work.
They're really small. Bye, guys.
All right. See you later. All right. So I hope that was fun.
That was fun, and I'm so glad. I didn't know he was coming on, but my response to you, the entry line was perfect.
Literally, like it was scripted. It seems scripted. Because we talked about all the different ways you might respond, and we're like, okay, well, if he says you, and he's like, he's not gonna say me. He's not gonna say me. I'm a pain in the ass. And I'm like, all right, well, if he doesn't say you, it's still funny. Like you can come in all pissed off or something.
Right.
And then you literally said the most perfect of all responses. Not Tom, not Tom is the answer. So we are obviously at an hour right now. So I'm going to try to rapid fire some listener questions that we got in. So our co-host of the main show, Justin Cooper, aka Coopster is a huge fan of your work and loves Hellboy. Loved Hellboy Plague of Wasps, which is the first in the trilogy so far of the audio dramas we mentioned. And he had a little anecdote. He said he and his family listened to it. They live in Chicago, and they drove up to Connecticut. And the only breaks were to stop for gas in the restroom. And he says they listened the entire way. And he says, my wife was terrified, and she has trouble around wasps, and now hates it when I say the word wasps, yet even she loved the story.
Oh, that's cool.
Pretty cool. He says he's also, as I am, just a huge nature nerd. It's just how it goes sometimes. Like people find each other. He asked if there was a particular species of wasp or insect that you had in mind when you researched them for the story.
You know what? No, I did do a little bit of research at the time for the story, but I don't even remember what the result was. Because again, I believe that there was a species of wasp that was actually really big.
Yeah.
And it was more about the effect than it was about the accuracy.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, I think he's hoping you're going to say the jeweled Japanese emerald wasp or something like, yes, it was that very specific, but yeah, actually the hornets get huge. Obviously murder hornets became a thing, a meme in 2020. Everybody learned about them, but they are freaking gigantic. But he also says, do you think Hellboy is a character? This is your opinion. Do you think he's a good person, or that he was only good because of his upbringing? So kind of a nature versus nurture thing. If he didn't have Professor Broom and the BPRD, what do you think?
I think he's absolutely by nature not the person his father wanted him to be.
Agreed.
I think that while certainly the environment he was brought up in helped to form him, that I do think fundamentally he is not demonic. He's a demon, but he's not demonic.
Great answer. Yeah, I think so too. I think at his core he's a good dude. He's just a good dude. We also had a question from Michael Miller. He's a columnist for Horror Hound magazine, and he's currently working on a werewolf script right now that is his life's dream, and we wish him the best with that. It's called Mincemeat, and I think he'll be happy to get the shout out. So he says he's a big fan of yours, and he's wondering when we are going to get an adaptation to your Shadow Saga. He's still waiting. He loves it so much. If there are no plans, can he get first dibs?
Tell him to go get the financing, and we'll go right ahead.
Has there ever been plans for that, or interest?
Producers have kicked the tires a number of times over the years. No one has ever been serious about it, which is a shame, because I think that it's such a sprawling story with so many different kinds of magic and monsters and creatures, and I think there's a great variety in there. But that said, there are lots of things that people kick the tires on all the time, or express an interest in, or option and don't move forward, and whatever. So, you never know.
You never know. Never know. And now my bonus question, which, as I showed you before, I'm drinking out of my Moon Knight glass. I read somewhere that in college you wrote part of a screenplay for a Moon Knight movie or something. Is that true?
Yes, it's true. Yeah.
He's one of my favorites as well. I guess I'm just wondering if the Oscar Isaac show had never happened and you were brought on, like, forget that even happened. Whatever your opinion is on it, put it aside. If it had never happened and they approached you to be the showrunner and lead writer on this. What would your elevator pitch for a Moon Knight show be? Either a show or a movie. And I feel very confident that you have an answer for this.
I mean, a show and movie are two different things, right? Because in a movie,
which would you go with? What do you think is better?
Either way, but if it's a show, I think it starts in Egypt, like the Doug Mensch original comic. And I think that it's got to be about how he, not necessarily an origin story, but, I would probably almost start with him taking that first breath as he's resurrected, in the tomb.
Very cool.
I think that the multiple personality thing was handled pretty well in the Disney series.
I agree.
But there were a lot of things about that series that I didn't understand why they were doing it. I just felt like it was, they went bigger than they needed to be.
I think they went bigger than they needed to and should have, given the number of episodes. I think if it had had like 4 more episodes, we could have done this big globetrotting Indiana Jones thing, I guess. I still enjoyed what was there. But that was my big takeaway. I love Oscar Isaac, and I think he did a phenomenal job. And it is the one time that I've had a fan casting that I had in my heart for years, even when other people weren't really screaming that person. It was just somebody that I thought would be perfect.
Right.
And then he got the job. And the reason I always thought he'd be perfect is he's just got that path. He can do like pathos. So like all over his face, his eyes are just, there's stuff going on behind those eyes. He's got so much going on. I think he's a great pick for that character. But,
like for me, I feel like the story, I guess, even if it's a film, I think about Batman. I think about Mission Impossible. I think about James Bond. I think about all kinds of things. And then I think about Moon Knight, and I think like, Memento. And I think like, okay, so, he wakes up in the tomb after having been resurrected from the dead.
Yeah.
With Khonshu's voice in his head and 4 different personalities, and has to figure out what happened to him and why he's there. And you realize that as a mercenary, Mark Spector, he was in the middle of something, and just like in the story, and was betrayed and killed. And so the movie is about him learning who he is, dealing with his multiple personalities, finding the person responsible for killing him, and realizing that what he was tasked with doing at the time is actually horrifying. And, his other personalities are like, nope, can't do that. So we're going to stop the thing that you were originally hired to do. So that's a good, like, less expensive, not a, because then people understand who he is, who he becomes, all of that. But I understand why they did what they did. But I don't know, simpler is better in a case like this. And also it doesn't feel like if you spend, $40 million to make that movie, then you're taking a low risk. And I've always said that I really feel like I wish Marvel would make lower budgeted films with some of their less bombastic characters, to enrich and deepen what the MCU is. But I understand that if that movie's made for $40 million and makes $100 million and that's it, it's a financial success, but the world sees it as a failure because it didn't make $800 million.
Right.
Right.
And that's what we're seeing with the Thunderbolts and stuff too.
Right. Thunderbolts is great, by the way.
I loved it. Yeah. I loved, absolutely emotional core to that movie that we haven't seen in Marvel movies. I think it's really great. Yeah. I love that. I mean, and Werewolf by Night was a perfect example of what you're talking about. Just this insane.
Werewolf by Night was great.
So great. I mean, I wish it was a full length movie, or I wish there could be a sequel to it in some. Yeah, because we need more Ted, right? We need more.
We need more Ted. We need
oh
more
my
Ted.
Jack
we
and
need more
Ted was
Elsa.
yeah,
And
Elsa was
also
amazing.
like you're talking to you're a Moon Knight guy. I think I might have told you this once before, but you're talking to a guy who, like, when I was riding my bike as a kid, I was Moon Knight.
Oh, okay. Well, I know you're like Tomb of Dracula is what I think of with you because you've mentioned that a lot of times.
Yeah. Well, Tomb of
So-
Dracula, I still maintain, is the best series Marvel ever published.
Wow. Tomb of Dracula. I've never gotten to read it. I know they put out some reissues of that, some collections. And I've always meant to go back to read it. And I know you talk about it a lot. You have a couple shirts, Tomb of Dracula shirts. So cool. I think for me, Moon Knight, I would lean into the street violence of Daredevil, the show Daredevil. And I think that, I want there to be some introspective noir stuff. So for me, the first scene can be Egypt, right? But then he wakes up in his chair. I think that's what I want to see. I want to see him like at the beginning of The Bottom, right? So where he's literally maybe having a dream of what happened, and you got part of that Egypt origin story. I would love to see him jarred awake, and then there's somebody talking to him in the corner. And I love the way that David Finch did the art for that book, like so much, and he used shadow almost in a Mignolian way. There's such deep shadows in that book. I mean, just that Finch doesn't usually do. And I loved the idea that there's a statue of Khonshu in the corner. You can almost not even see what it is. And he's hearing the voice. There's some great stuff.
Because you have to understand, I grew up on the 80s Moon Knight.
Yeah.
Which
very different.
I still think I did enjoy the run that you're talking about, but I still feel like, the sort of global anti-terrorist, Manhattan anti-crime, the sort of, you're talking about street level Moon Knight, and so am I.
Yeah.
I think that there's a place where those things meet.
So does your Moon Knight, does he fight Jack Russell?
Yes.
Oh, see, we need it. That can still happen though. The jury's not out on that. We might.
Absolutely.
That can still happen.
Moon Knight, the werewolf, all these characters that are interconnected that they could explore, but only on television. They're not going to put them in films, and I get that.
Yeah, it's fine. I have no problem with that if it's the quality and care of Werewolf by Night. And I don't know if you've gotten to see the Director by Night special they put out.
No.
It was oh my God. Do you know anything about the director of that movie? I won't go into a whole thing.
Right?
I can't remember his name, but he was a soundtrack guy. He was a musician.
Yeah.
Fascinating tale. Absolutely. There's an hour-long special about it. I think it's longer than the actual movie. Just talking about how that came about. And it's called Director by Night. It's on Disney Plus. Check that out if anybody is interested. You should check that out. It's so cool.
Cool.
But definitely good stuff. Chris, thank you so much for coming on. I think we're about at time here. Guys, The Nightbirds is out now from St. Martin's Press. You can find it wherever your fine books are sold at all your usual retailers. Chris, can you tell our listeners maybe what you have coming up and where they can follow you online?
You could follow me on Blue Sky, on Facebook, and Instagram. And what I have coming up, I'm finishing a new novel for next year, but I can't talk about that yet. But August 19th, we'll see the debut of The End of the World as We Know It, New Tales of Stephen King's The Stand, edited by me and Brian Keene, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's 34 stories by 36 authors, expanding and exploring the world King built in The Stand, authorized and introduced by King himself.
So cool.
And I can't be more excited than that. And
there's a hell of a roster of authors you got in this book too. I saw Jonathan Jans just posting about it, and everybody's like kind of just like, yeah, let's talk about it. And it's great cover, really awesome idea. I know you guys, you and Brian Keene both have forwards in the book as well, and I'm really excited for this. I think any King fan or Keene fan, either of the Ks, if you enjoy either of them, you should be very excited. The End of the World as We Know It. Awesome cover too. I love all these like typography covers that have kind of become in vogue in the last
cool. I just love how
years.
I love how they matched the type and tone to the original.
Yeah.
And even if when you get the book in hardcover, when you open it, you'll find that the flyleafs on the actual cover have that same sort of almost like brownish tint, that yellowish brownish tint that was common in the 70s.
Oh man,
it's great. It looks great.
It's amazing. I can't wait for that one for sure. I'm glad you mentioned it. I was hoping it was going to come up. So I'll hit this little button right here and let you out of the brig. But before you run up those stairs to freedom, Chris, let me just sincerely thank you one more time for being on the show and for playing along. And thank you to Tom Snigoski for helping me punk you a little bit. And I hope you had fun with that. I just want to say, it's been a while. I first met you and Jim Moore back in 2016 when you guys used to hold those writers coffee house meetup events.
Yeah.
And I still remember one of the very first things you said that day. You guys walked into a room full of young and aspiring writers, some of which you knew, and me, you definitely did not. And I'm sure I was not the only one. And you said something to the effect of, if you're going to write, understand that you are neither as good or as bad as you think you are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really talks about, like what we were talking about earlier, that really speaks to this notion of, do I deserve this? Imposter syndrome sort of a thing. And that was one of the first things you said that day. So for 9 years, that little bit of advice has served as one of my primary North Stars. And I think of it often. Every time I'm overly worried about a story not working out, or every time I think I've written something that's so incredible, I can't believe I typed it myself. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. I always remember what Chris Golden said about confidence being a two-way street. And I just wanted to let you know. So you're
I'm glad to hear that, Steve. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody's just got to, keep their feet on the ground,
That's right. So for all of us, thank you for, being an Obi-Wan to not just my Luke Skywalker, but literally countless of us in the writer sphere. Certainly enough to fill up an Imperial trash compactor many, many times over. Certainly.
Sounds good.
I told you I was gonna make you uncomfortable. I was gonna embarrass you a little bit.
You succeeded. That's okay.
There you go.
I appreciate it.
So I'll take us out with the outro. Guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Brig. That wraps up the episode. If you haven't jumped ship by now, we certainly hope you've enjoyed this week's bonus journey over the treacherous waters of all the things that made growing up awesome. If you like what you've heard, please hit up our popular Facebook group and subscribe to the show on your podcast app of choice. You can also find us on Good Pods, where you can like episodes, leave reviews, and give us some much appreciated feedback. For more information on The Dorkening, or to subscribe to us or any of the great shows they got there, please visit thedorkening.com, and be sure to check out our killer sponsors, Deadly Grounds Coffee to die for. I've been your host. My name is Parasite Steve, aka Steve Van Sampson, and it is indeed a sad thing your adventures have ended here. Good night.